Have you heard about this personal and professional podcast?
Coaching in Session
with your host, Michael Rearden.
Welcome, Michael T. Brown, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Of course, today we're going to be talking about your counseling work, the work you do with resilience, and we're going to also be getting into your book momentarily. I love the title of your book. We're not going to spoil it yet. I think it's going to be a wonderful surprise for people later on in this episode. But if you could, can you tell the audience who you are, what you do, and how you help in your own words?
Yes, sir. So my name is Michael Brown, and I'm a licensed therapist. I live in the Northern Virginia, D.C. metropolitan area. My main job is I see individuals for counseling, families, couples, here regionally and across the country. And I do some coaching and some consulting. And a big part of my life my career has been about empowering others and helping them to reach their goals. That's one of my goals, is to help other people reach theirs. Yeah, anytime I get the opportunity to talk more about the profession and how we can help more people, I'm excited. So again, thanks for having me.
Of course, and we're going to be getting into that momentarily. I always like to ask people when they find a profession that they love and they're so passionate about, did you always know that or knew you were going to be getting into counseling work?
Yeah, I can't say I knew I'd get into counseling specifically, but I felt pretty early on led to the helping professions. Early on, I'd say in my life, I had a strong indication that and a passion for empowering others. And I think a lot of it has to do with, with my upbringing and some of the environments I was surrounded by. But in many ways, I'd say this profession chose me. I'd say it's a bit of a calling.
Would you say your upbringing was something that you were missing and you want to instill it into others?
Well, no, not necessarily from missing it from my standpoint. I would say my upbringing had a lot to do with seeing it happen in front of me. I grew up in a loving community, and I saw how positive impacts could change the trajectory of people's lives. And that's something that I grew up in, and it's something that drives me. And so I'd say in many ways, it's a connection to how I was raised and how I see lives change. When you have loving, caring people in our lives, it can help us reach our goals.
Very true. I was a teacher for many years, and I have seen firsthand what love and what just being present can do for an individual, because some of the most lost children, students, be it, they don't have a support. And then the teachers that are there might be checked out already, or their parents might be, in and about or around, who knows, whatever is going on in their life. And it almost feels as if they are all alone. So it's so important to have individuals that are there to help people, get out on the other end, understanding that people care about you, people love you. And it's something that is not just American culture, it's all around the world. Would you say, though, that in America, we struggle with the aspect of family and loving and caring one another?
Yeah, I think I see it more globally in a way, not just, in American culture. I think I'd say generally I'm an optimist. So I'd see it more glass half full than glass half empty. Now, there's no getting away that, our society has its ills. We have our issues, we have our challenges. But I think the fact that we're able to have conversations like this, to be able to help inspire, empower others. And I appreciate you for sharing this platform and for creating this platform, because I think, with the technology advances, yes, there's a lot of negative that we could lean towards, but there's a lot of positive. And look at all the podcasts, look at all the information, look at all the ways that people can make a positive impact. I'd lean more towards what's good that's going on. I recently read a book called Learned Optimism. And in it talks about how, we get to make a choice about how we view the world. We don't choose everything that happens to us, but we do get to choose how we think about things and how we navigate things. So while there's many ills, while there's many challenges, particularly when you think about, how a lot of people are feeling, after this recent election, regardless to where people fall on political topics, there's an impact. That's always been the case with politics and elections. But at the end of the day, we still have a voice. We still get to have an impact. We still get to choose how we're going to show up in the world. And So I'd say there's a help wanted sign, not just in America, but around the world. Leaders wanted. And we all get the opportunity to choose how we're going to influence. Because I believe that's one of the best definitions of leadership. Leadership is influence. And we get to choose how we're going to influence, how we're going to make an impact. And you think about that teacher, for example, your former profession. You didn't get to choose all your students, I would imagine. You didn't get to choose the challenges that they came in with. We get to choose how we're going to respond, how we're going to teach, and how we're going to educate. And so that's where I fall on that.
Wonderful. I love it. You brought up two powerful words, optimism and influence. Some people might say optimism is a fairy tale. It's a dream, right? People can give themselves good thoughts and bad things can happen. And sometimes what happens to people is their spirit breaks, where they keep thinking good and they keep thinking good and things are not going their way. And eventually they say, well, what's the point anymore? There's many people in the world, around the world that are living in this fixed mindset today, or in this pessimistic mindset, because they were once optimistic, they were once hopeful and joyful, and it seems like all of their efforts have gone to vain. What would you say to those people who have lost hope or are on the brink of losing hope?
Great question. I think we can afford to lose a lot of things in life. Some things are going to leave us. We're going to leave some things. One thing that we cannot, that I think we need to be intentional about not losing or leaving, is our belief. Our belief system, our belief in change, and what are we going to do about our situation? So the optimism is not just about, wishful thinking. Optimism can lead to real action. Glass half full over glass half empty. So adversity, we know, is going to touch us all at some point. To every life, some rain must fall. But we can get an umbrella. We can weather the storm. We can partner with like-minded people. And, if you find yourself in a ditch, quit digging and we figure out what are my next steps moving forward. So the mindset in the therapy world, cognitive behavioral therapy, cognition, the way we think really matters. Our thoughts impact our emotions impact our choices, our behavior. So if we're thinking the right thoughts, it's going to tend to make us feel better, but hopefully lead us to do better. Thoughts, feelings, behavior. And when we get all three of them moving in the right direction, it goes beyond just wishful thinking into real action. So I'd say for someone who may be listening, may be struggling, they may find themselves in despair. Use this conversation as a motivation to say, what are my next steps? Is there somebody I can reach out to that can maybe steer me in the right direction? And then once we get some momentum built, it's amazing how momentum leads to us wanting to achieve more and attain more. But the key sometimes is to just get started and to be willing to ask for help.
I'm going to get to influence in a minute, but I do want to ask a question. And it could be similar, it could not be similar. So it's good to just be your perspective on this, okay? Is there a difference between counseling and therapy?
I'd say they're very closely aligned. Not much of a difference there. You think about, how something can be therapeutic. That means something is helpful to us. Counseling is the realm where it deals with the more the talk part of it, right? But not a major distinction. Both, I'd say, in many ways, can be used interchangeably.
I know there's people who would get both types of services. They'll see a counselor, a life coach, somewhere along the lines, and then they'll also have a therapist. So it's almost like they have two individuals or they have two sectors where they're working on things separately. I'm not sure if that's beneficial or not for the individual, but from what I hear, they typically love having it separated versus, all right, I'm going to have a therapist that does everything, because sometimes when they have a therapist that does everything, it feels like they never graduate.
Yeah. So if we're talking counselor / life coach, we got different types of counselors.
Well,
So you may have a licensed
we can just keep
counselor.
a counselor. Yeah, just keep a counselor to just keep it simple.
Yeah. So that leads to a great point of whoever you're talking to that's helpful to you. You'd want to find out their credentials and find out what it is that they specialize. Because so you may have a pastoral counselor. They might not be licensed in their state. But you may have a school counselor. You may have a camp counselor. So the word counselor can be very wide ranging. A financial counselor. But when you're talking about a licensed professional counselor, that's somebody who's going to focus more on the mental health aspects that's been licensed in that particular field. A therapist, is another word that can be used in various realms. A massage therapist, we're talking mental health therapist. So at the end of the day, if somebody's looking for someone to talk to, do your homework, find out their credentials, because it does matter what lane they're in and how they've been trained. But the words counselor and therapist, in society has a wide breadth. So you just want to make sure we move from the overall view of it and really nail down to what the person needs.
Hmm.
Because we could get into
Good point.
psychiatrists, psychologists. So there's all different types of lanes in the mental health profession.
Yeah, and America has made it so difficult for a person to understand what they truly need, I think, when it comes to these types of professions. Do I need a therapist? And most people will run to a therapist before they would a licensed counselor, just from my workings and dealings with people. It was one of those things of like, are you getting what you need versus you just kind of go for what you think you need?
Most people, when you say a therapist, that's usually going to be a counselor. The question is, are they licensed or
Mm-hmm.
not? So if someone says, I'm going to see a mental health therapist, chances are they're talking to someone who would be a licensed counselor. Some people call me their counselor. Some people call me their therapist. They're right both ways.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
But you promote yourself as a licensed counselor, not a,
That's
not
right.
a therapist. If you go to Google, people go, they type in therapist and they say you're my therapist. They don't necessarily go for counselor. Now, what I will say people go for counseling for is if you are a parent and you're looking for a counselor for your child, for
Okay.
like the family,
Some of
it's
that may
like a
be
family
regional as
dynamic.
well, too, Mike. Some of that might be regional as well,
Mm,
because I've seen it both ways, where it's just some
mm,
of it is preference
yeah,
and how people like to say it themselves. But I'd say, generally speaking, the two terms are
100%.
used pretty interchangeably.
Definitely. It's important for the clarification, I think, because, you know, I don't want people to feel as if they're, seeing someone and they feel as if they have a problem. It's one of those stigmas that I have to go see a professional because I have an issue. I learned this early on and, when I was working special ed and, like they would see their therapists and their school counselors and things like that. Right. And the student will come to me after they have their IEP meetings and stuff like that. And they're like, I'm dumb or I'm stupid or they don't believe in me. Right. They have all these negative things going on in their mind. And I'm like, whoa, you're 7. Right? You have all of these adult problems and literally like this is something that you're giving yourself. So most of these kids that I was dealing with, they had severe behavioral problems, but most of those behavioral problems were shunned when you didn't focus on them. So when the teacher talked about it and they brought it into meetings, into their mom or grandma, whoever came in, typically wasn't a father in the picture. So, dealing with boys at least, or the father was absent, you dealt with an array of insecurities from that child. And those insecurities just compound as they, develop and they grow up. Now, sometimes they get the help, they get the support they need along the way, and they do like a 180. I've seen it happen. But sometimes they fall into the system where it's just like they are, I don't want to say circumstance, but like they just fall into, their environment, like their environment takes over. We can think of, young men in Chicago, for example, like their lifestyle versus maybe someone who is growing up in Northern California. They have a very different lifestyle and they have different access to different things. So one might have many accesses to counselors and people who help and love them versus someone who's literally trying to make it through and learning from their peers. So we have like a huge array. And the word influence now is where I want to lead the conversation is if we are going to influence young minds or just minds in general, it doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from Chicago, you could be from Northern California or a wealthy neighborhood. If you have strong mentors or good influence, you can, put yourself on the right path because I can't tell you how many stories I've seen of people who have grown up in neighborhoods that you might not even offer any hope to, but they come out, shining on the other end. How powerful is influence when it comes to young minds and then adult minds who feel lost?
I think influence is the engine in many ways to success. at the end of the day, right, we all get to make a choice about what type of life we want to lead. And the influential people in our lives, the people in our circle of influence, the village that many would say, right, can have a tremendous impact in exposing young people to a better way of life. Books can be influential. Someone may be growing up in a difficult home environment, but they got to a library and saw a different way. They read about it, they dreamed it, they imagined it. Obviously, yeah, I've heard it put this way, it's better to see a sermon than hear a sermon. And we all live lives that are speaking to others. And, not everybody might get their name put on lights or have their own platform or have their own, highlight reel that a lot of people can point to, but we all can write our names in the heart of someone else. You might inspire one person that may inspire a generation. We just never know. So influence, is a game changer because I believe the human spirit is very resilient and wants to wants to be successful. And obviously life can want to, and circumstances can want to suck that out of us. But, the individual, the parent who says, maybe I don't have this, but I'm going to get my child to someone who does have it. Or if I can get them to an environment where they can be inspired or be shown something different, then sometimes we just need to see something different to know that it's possible. Maybe it's a field trip someone was taking on. They just saw something different. Or they visited a friend's house and was like, wow, maybe I could have one of these one day. You just never know how we can be influenced and how we can be a positive influence to others. So influence in many ways is currency. And we get to spend it how we choose. And I'd say it's good to think about, how can I be intentional about positively impacting the lives of others? And when that service mindset is there, man, tremendous things can happen.
100% agree with that. You talked about books, and books can definitely change lives. And I can't tell you how many books I've read that were inspiring. And I love speaking to people and I ask them, what's your favorite book or the book that changed your life? And I always say the book that changed your life is not the book that changed your life. It's all the subsequent books that were the foundation for you to get all the learning and the wisdoms that one day, now that book that you read, it finally clicked to saying, hey, all of these things that I've been learning and all of these things that I've been instilling within me are finally starting to coagulate, and now I can see it. It's tangible for me. My mind sees that is now possible. And you have a book, and I just love the title of your book, A Beautiful Challenge. What was one of the reasons why you wrote this book, A Beautiful Challenge?
Yes, thanks for asking. So being a counselor and a therapist, I started out as a school counselor. I worked all three levels: middle school, high school, and elementary. And I wrote a book before that called Born to Achieve. And it was kind of like, in many ways, a love letter to youth. Things I learned over the years that I think can help youth. And after writing that and just spending time, encouraging young people along those lines, I realized in private counseling and just through life and experiences and also in ministry was that, any relationship, successful, healthy relationships are not just inherited. In many ways, they are fought for and won. So the book is called A Beautiful Challenge, Building Healthy Relationships. And in there, I just really wanted to highlight here, what are some tools and some strategies that can help us win in our relationships, whether it's personal or professional. Effective communicating, effective problem solving. Not all relationships go south just because of a lack of will. Sometimes it's a lack of skill. And some of these things can be taught, of how we can communicate more effectively, how we can connect better to others, how we can forgive, how we can challenge ourselves to be better individuals. Because I believe in many ways, healthy relationships are made up of healthy individuals. So when the individual gets healthy and better and works on ourselves, then we can be a better significant other. We can be a better colleague. We can be a better family member. So that's what the book highlights. How do we to work on ourselves and to also have better interpersonal relationships. So it came from a place of just seeing a need and just experiences and having worked with so many people over the years.
And I'm sure your work with, middle schools and high schools and, even elementary schools have made you well aware of some of the problems that families are facing, that they are going through, and how the children are developing. And I always say it's easier to build a child that's not broken than to heal a broken adult.
Mm.
But sometimes there's just going to be some circumstance that breaks that child. And it could be the smallest thing. It really can be the smallest thing. But it could be a big thing. It could be a divorce. It could be a death of a loved one, a family. And now they feel so disconnected where, it's almost like they are just kind of going down this path of life and they have no direction. Even though they're walking, they have no direction. What would be something that you can instill in a mind? It doesn't matter if it's young or older, that if they're on the wrong path, that they can change that path.
Yeah, I think, first of all, knowing where we are, being self-aware, to say this is bad, this hurts, this is painful, whether it's trauma, whether it's dealing with unforgiveness, whether it's being in a abusive environment, whether it's having lack, wherever it's, first of all, we just need to know where we are, self-awareness. Now, a child may struggle with that, obviously, because they just, might not be able to articulate it. Hopefully there's loving adults around them who can help them navigate that. And hopefully, right, the system will identify those who may have trouble helping themselves. So we have a responsibility as a society, right, to look out for youth. And I don't know who I'm talking to right now. Maybe I'm encouraging somebody. You may know a child who's struggling. It's okay to ask that child what's going on. How are they doing? Are they being well taken care of? So often you run into people, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well, right, Michael? Working in the schools where somebody took the time to get eyeball to eyeball with the child and ask them, are they okay? And really care. So awareness is important. Us adults looking for children who might be struggling, who can't articulate what they're going through, but we know or we sense something. So to be a child advocate, right? We all can be child advocates. So that has its place. So self-awareness is important. Where am I? The next question I'd say in many ways is, where do I want to go? What's my goals? And how do I get there? Where am I? Where do I want to go? How do I get there? Some child may say, you know what? I remember a friend of mine told me, Michael, I actually was telling me about a difficult home life she had growing up. And I remember just asking her, how'd you get through that? She said, I hung out at school a lot. I just hung out at school a lot. That was her way to navigate that difficult home life. She decided not to be home very much. She found an oasis at school of loving adults who had her back and would give her things to do. And that helped her navigate. So you got to want it. We got to want to be something. We got to want it. Right, does there have to be a desire to achieve? It's great if we're inspired to achieve, but it's okay to not have all the answers. Sometimes we just got to know the what first. That I want something different. Some of that's just internal. We don't even necessarily ask for it. There's a survival instinct that we have, and that village can help us navigate it. Where am I? Where do I want to go? How do I get there? And those questions, I think, can help us navigate our resilience and how we're going to bounce back from adversity.
Our world today, our village is almost like the whole world, especially since our smartphones and our computers, they keep us so connected. But we are living in a world that even though we have all these connections, we are so disconnected in a sense. We will be keyboard warriors and we will say hurtful things, but we wouldn't do it in front of their faces. We would, personify ourselves as this person on the internet, but we will have low self-esteem in the classroom or just in our workplace. Why do you think there's so much disconnection today and there's just so much more opportunity?
Good question. I think, a lot of it has to do with, I think some of it's generational. If you grew up with a device in your hand, that's a little different maybe when you didn't, for someone who didn't. So some of it's generational. I think some of it is cyclical from a standpoint of, I think there's still a desire to want to connect with people. And I think eventually sometimes we may get bored on our phones. So I think some of that's changing. I think even some young people are catching more wind of that because at a certain point, right? Again, that innate desire to want to be successful. The question can ultimately come back to, what am I doing about me reaching my goal? So if you're on IG or whatever platform and you're seeing other people doing great things, eventually you'd hope that person would ask themselves, what am I doing? So, at the end of the day, we can use the technology. In many ways, the technology, it's kind of like money. It just throws gasoline in many ways on what we already are. So if somebody, so if you got a bad attitude with a phone, you're gonna have a bad attitude without a phone, right? So if you got money and you use it, at the end of the day, we're still human beings, and the technology is going to, in many ways, highlight or show what's going on. The same way somebody can cyberbully on the phone is the same way somebody can say, "Let me start a podcast and inspire others." Same technology. We just have to make sure that our mindset, right, is geared toward using it in ways that's going to be helpful and productive.
There's a very different dynamic, I would say, between, boys and girls or men and women in general. Boys would play video games all day, and girls, you don't necessarily see that they want to hang out with their friends and they want to put makeup on and things like that, right? Like, it's a very different dynamic. It's funny because Jordan Peterson brought up something with the boys. At least he didn't really say much about the girls. He just says hormones and stuff like that. But he said the boys would do these video games of trying to personify themselves for the insecurities that they hold. So they would be a warrior, fighting a dragon or something. They'd be the knight in shining armor that saves a princess or whatever, right? So the video game that they play that is basically covering up or filling in the holes that they're not living in their real life. It wasn't until I was like 18, 19, 20 where I start to really look at my life for what it could be, because I was just kind of moving through, going to school, right? Parents say you got to go to school, go to school, got to go to college, right? But then it wasn't until where I'm getting to the point now, it's like, okay, now I'm becoming an adult. I need to start figuring out what I need to do. And it wasn't until then I start to pay attention to all my insecurities and all the things that I was trying to cover up, and my ego that was trying to, hide the inferior person I thought I was, or maybe I was at the time. And I had to build that person. I had to build that man. And oftentimes, many people don't want to do the work to build up into the person that's going to help them get to the life they want, the success they want, the purpose that they want, the passions that they want to go live. And so they just kind of play it safe, right? They just say, okay, well, I'll still play my video games and I will, cover up my insecurities. I'll get my needs met, maybe from the government and my food stamp, or maybe I'll, find a nice, safe job. And people will play it safe rather than take risk and challenge. And my question to you is risk and challenge. Is risk and challenge something people should be diving into or steering away from?
I would say no risk, no reward. The fruit is out on the limb. The fruit is out on the limb. I think we should take smart risks, right? We don't need to necessarily just throw caution at the wind and be reckless. But at the end of the day, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And you touched on some key things there, Michael. You talked a little bit about, your path and your journey. And I think it's so important that when we talk to people and we connect with people, to keep that in mind, that we all are on a journey. And sometimes we judge without learning that person's story or their journey. So sometimes I think we need to be more curious about other people's journey. In therapy, the therapeutic world, I don't bring people into counseling and just start asking what's wrong with them. We first need to get to know you, learn your story. And I think if we'll take more time to get to know people's story, particularly what's going on right now in society, right? With the labeling, the judging, that we see going on so much, to pause, be interested in people's story. And sometimes as adults, we ought not get amnesia. Sometimes adults look at children or a younger generation and forget their challenge, forget their insecurities, right? Like they just came out the womb perfect.
Mm-hmm.
No. Right? We all going to have some struggles, some adversity, and that we don't get so disconnected that the generation gap starts to look at where we're just judging the next generation. I had a come to Jesus moment myself one time in high school, working in the high school, Michael, where, man, I was struggling, man, with the sagging pants, man. I was struggling with the kid. Oh man, it was killing me, Mike. It was killing me, man. And I remember one day, I was talking to a young man walking in the hall, and it just aggravated me that he caught me at the wrong time. And I was like, man, just pull your pants up, man. Like, what are you doing? I came at him a little bit, like, what are you doing? And I never forget, Mike. He said, he kind of pulled me to, he kind of came up to me, he was like, all you had to do was ask. And I was like, wow, okay, you got me. It was a reminder, Mike, bring it in, have a conversation, just ask him to pull his pants up. And I'll never forget that. And it was a reminder of sometimes we need to just ask. Young people are waiting sometimes to be asked, to be taught, to be mentored, to be trained. Mike, sometimes we're judging folks who we're supposed to be teaching and helping. If the teacher's looking down on the students, we got a problem. So at the end of the day, right, we can remove some of those divisions, some of those gaps. If we do what a lot of folks did with us, instead of judging us, they may have mentored us or coached us or spent time with us. And the principle in many ways is connect before you correct. Another way of saying it is, and we've heard it often, right? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's a great place for leadership. That's a great place for influence. That might not come with a lofty title, but it was those people in our lives, right, who might not have had a big lofty title, who took the time to get to know us, who took the time to invest in us. And we all can do that.
There's an idea of patience, right? Especially in teaching, you have to have an immense amount of patience, because it could just be that one moment where you let it slip, where that child is now, all right, I'm not going to talk to Michael anymore, or I'm not going to talk to Mr. Brown anymore about anything, because, he can't even come to me. Right. He let this moment get to him. And now, I'm going to think about that moment. And maybe today that young man is just thinking about, I remember one day where, Mr. Brown came up to me and he yelled at me, and that was an eye-opening experience for me. It could be good or it could be bad, right? Perception, of course. Maybe he won't appreciate it being called out in front of his friends or whatever, right? But down the road, he can say, that man saves me, right? So it's almost like, someone, sometimes, people will have the most love and the most goodwill for someone, but sometimes the way it's presented at the time might be misconstrued. And so one of the questions or the conversations I would like to have with you is love and hate, because we talked a little bit about love, where you have to be able to love yourself and love one another. But when it comes to love, how many people don't love themselves? They don't look themselves in the mirror, and they don't give themselves positive things or positive affirmations about themselves. They look at their insecurities. They say, oh, look, I got a zit. Oh, I got this. Oh, I look ugly. So it's the negatives that are ruling their mind at the time. And sometimes we can be short on patience, whether it be because the principal came up to us and gave us more work, or, something happened with our own family or our loved ones, and we're just on edge that day. And so my question is it easier to love or is it easier to hate? Because hate will sometimes sweep over you without your consent, and love is almost intentional, where you do things with care. I think of holding a baby. When I pick up a newborn, I don't do it, like angrily or like quickly. I do it slowly. I do it almost methodically. I'm like, okay, let me make sure his or her head is okay. Make sure, they're supported, make sure that they're cared, and make sure that they know that, these hands are full of love. Because I can easily pick up the kid and throw him around and, fling him around. And sometimes that happens with, some people who might be going postpartum and something like that. I'm not sure if you've ever seen some of those people, but it's a very interesting dynamic. And so the question or the conversation is it easier to love or hate?
That's a profound question, Michael. Wow. Is it easier to love or to hate? I think in many ways it has to do with whether the individual was loved or hated more. So if somebody grew up in a loving home, I think it'd be easier to love. If someone was taught more of hate, it'd be easier to hate. The question really makes me think about, whether or not that person has a belief system bigger than themselves as well, whether through their faith or their belief in humanity or belief in a higher power, belief in God. Because in many ways, my belief system is that God is love. And so it's really hard to love others if we don't have a godly perspective of what love is. Unconditional love says, I love you in spite of. That would include grace, that would include forgiveness. While it may be difficult if someone's been hurt or has experienced some trauma, naturally we would want to turn more towards hate. But I think that's where our faith and the spirituality can really kick in, because forgiveness can help us love. Love can help us to forgive. There's a spiritual teaching that says, love covers a multitude of sins, not hate. Dr. King said, right, only love can drive out hate. But it's hard to love others if we don't truly have a love for ourselves and have a love for, and know that we're loved by God first. So we can't change necessarily the past about who loved us and the world that that child or that individual came into. But hopefully over time, through trials and through experience, we can realize that, hate is not going to achieve the results. Hate rarely achieves successful results. It usually doesn't end well. Love, though, creates the positive results. When we love ourselves, when we love others, when we love what we do, I think that lines up with good results.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen that firsthand, and I can attest to that, where if you can love, or if you can just see that if something wasn't good in your life, like my father's a good example. He grew up in a single mother household, and he didn't have a father. His father was absent. And even when he had the opportunity to meet his father, like later on, like in his 20s, he was like, "You're dead to me." And he was like, "I don't have a father, and I'm just going to be the father that you never were." And so he raised us, according to what he was missing or what he missed growing up. And, he was, beat by his mom and stuff as discipline, with a switch, a stick or whatever. He didn't lay a hand on us. And he was in construction early on. So he was a big guy. I'm talking about like his arms were huge. Like if this man hits you, you'll be gone. So we learned a respect and fear from, within that relationship, where we respected him, but then we also feared him, but we still loved him. He was our dad. He was the fun guy that we hanged around. And I think about this idea of respect and fear quite often, where a kid might not respect a teacher because they might not fear the teacher, or they might not respect authority because they don't fear the authority.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one incident when I was a teacher. This is what I did too. I did music and special ed. I was doing music at the time, and it was a third grade class. The teacher was in her first year, and the class was, oh my goodness, they were loud. They were rambunctious. She could not get control of this class. And so she was yelling and she was screaming at these kids, right? She was hoping the fear would get them to respect her, get them to listen. Well, it did the opposite. All the kids were laughing and they were chuckling. Oh, we made her yell. They got a rise out of it. And it got to the point where, like, my door was open, because I always keep my door open. And so I say, hold on 1 second to the class. I walked across, I went across the way, and I was like, listen, I'm over here trying to make music, trying to have a good class. And over here, I just hear everyone being disrespectful. And I just basically gave it to them. And they were all like, oh my goodness. And it wasn't so much that they only respected me. They feared me also, because I was a big guy, big muscles, things like that, right? So there was that aspect, that dynamic there. And so I wanted to present that to you. Is there an aspect of respect and fear? And is it an appropriate thing for someone to have or withhold within their mind when they're looking at an authority, or looking at a parent, or looking at someone who has influence?
Yeah, I think fear, can create some change, but the word I would prefer maybe over fear might be reverence or respect. You think about it from a parenting perspective, right? The child might be afraid, but the challenge with creating too much of an environment of fear is that that parent or that person may be a dose of respect and reverence or fear. You particularly use a good example with dads, right? It's kind of like, I might not want to try him. The dad may be great, loving guy, but I'm not messing. There's a certain amount of reverence there, in that. So I get the perspective of fear, but I think at the end of the day, the love, the approachability, the understanding that there's boundaries, that there's a line that needs to be drawn, right? That may be more on the respect side than the fear. But no, I get the perspective of a healthy dose of fear can go a long way. Where the class maybe looked at you like, I don't know what Mr. Rearden might do, because he came in here pretty strong, right? So a healthy dose, I would say, of reverence and even fear can go a long way. But we know in the end, love wins.
And I can tell you, and firsthand, the kids can tell if you care about them.
That's right.
They truly can. Even if you are over here fooling around with them and pulling up your pants and stuff like that, they can tell.
That's
like
right.
Deep down, they just have this sixth sense. Like, this person cares about me.
Because you showed
And
leadership in that moment. You showed leadership to say,
yeah,
I'll step away from my class because it's not you. You saw your influence as more than just your class. Not that you were coming in trying to dominate her class, but you showed leadership of, guys, we're not doing this. Right? You saw yourself as a leader in the building as well. And that goes a long way.
mm-hmm.
And that's very key.
Yeah, 100%. I say all this to have a roundabout way of saying that there are so many people in the world that are paying attention. There's so many people that are looking at you, whether you are that young kid still in your mind or your body, or you're that adult that is struggling or trying to get by, or maybe you're that successful entrepreneur or business person that is winning, right? Maybe you're the family man or woman that is just doing what needs to be done. And people love to have some type of affirmation of what they're doing right.
That's great.
And if you're thinking like, am I doing okay? Right? Because sometimes you're just kind of walking the path and you're doing the best you can. And, I can't tell you how many people will come to me saying, Mike, I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
And I hear it every day almost. It's like, I'm doing the best I can. And my final question to you is, if a person is giving their best, they're giving their all, and maybe someone feels as if it's not enough. Maybe the person has this entitlement. Maybe this person feels as if they deserve more. Maybe this person looks at someone else's situation. They say, well, my friend gets more of this or that, or, my husband does this or that, and my wife does this or that. And so the person is doing all they can. They're giving all they got. But it's almost like the person feels as if it's inadequate. Is there a way for a person to truly identify that if someone is not giving their all, they can tell, or if someone's giving everything they got, they can tell? Because it's easy to say, well, this person has this, but we have this. Why is this so?
Some of that plays out over time, right? Through maturity, growth, and wisdom, that we realize that some things have to take time to unfold. A child might not have that wisdom. That's why the adults around that child can hopefully point out, I see you. And whether we're doing our best or not, don't give up. Persevere. Set goals. Strive hard to reach them. And God often sends people our way. That it's nothing like, right? And I imagine you can relate to this, being and working with young people as well. Being that adult and you see that person who is doing their best. One of my mentors, a good friend of mine, told me one time, Mike, he said, you know what? He's in education as well. And he said, you know what? If people knew what a lot of these kids dealt with at home, they'd be glad they even came to school today. We don't know what people are going through. We see people oftentimes in snapshots and we think we know them, or we think we know what they've experienced. So I say to that person, don't give up. Persevere. Seek a mentor. Seek a counselor. You know, get in a room of where you want to go. Be creative. If the door's locked, go through the window. If the window's locked, climb down the chimney. At the end of the day, right, we get this one life to live. We get the opportunity to maximize that life and have faith that there are people who do care. There are people who will help. And thank God for that village that I was fortunate to have, that I still have, and that we can still create, and that still exists in many ways. So whether we're doing our best or not, we can do better, and we can persevere and find our purpose and get passionate about it. Find what you love. If you say, well, I don't know what I love, go on an expedition. That's the homework there. Go on a journey to find what you love. And I heard it put, finding your purpose is like, kind of like trying new chocolates. Just keep trying until you find out what you like. Sometimes you got to be on the mission just to say, I'm seeking what it is. And a lot of it has to do already with the gifts that are within us. Some of it is God-given gifts. Find yourself in that lane. If it's music, if it's arts, if it's technology, if it's education, if it's helping others, whatever it is, whether it's vocationally or just service oriented, the more we get on the path of doing things that we love and operating in our gifting, our God-given gifting, good things flow from that. Make a decision to move forward. I was watching a podcast one time, and a gentleman said he was asked a question that was a game changer for me, Michael. He said he was struggling in life, and a mentor asked him, are you interested in being successful, or are you committed? Because if we're interested, we're not going to just mess around and reach our goals. But if we're committed, we'll do what it takes. So I ask that to the audience today. Move beyond just interest into commitment towards the things that you seek, and good things will start to happen from there.
And I just like the idea of the village mindset, where if an outsider is coming into the village, maybe the guards are there on the outside and they say, halt, stop. And, what is your purpose? Right? Because they're protecting the villagers, they're protecting the village. And maybe the person says, I'm looking for a home, I'm looking for a place. And guess where they go? They go typically to the elder. They go to the, or the elders.
That's right.
They speak with them and they learn from them. And typically from there, they can get a good feeling of if this person belongs, if this person wants to stay truly. Because people can look from the outside in and say, so nice. We can think of, let's say like the movie Home Alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say like an old movie. And like the young boy who was left, right? There multiple times, I don't know how it happened, but he was left. People can say, oh, the parents are so irresponsible and they don't care and they don't love him the way they do the other kids. Otherwise, they would have made sure he was there. But then there's the other side of, there was the mom who gave up her trip and says, I want to go, find my boy, right? I want to go get my son. And so there's just two views when it comes to how a person can see a situation. They can look at the bad, of course, right? The brain is naturally wired to be negative. I mean, it was once a survival mechanism. But today it doesn't serve a purpose. So if we can focus more on the love, if we can focus more on the appreciation, we can focus more on the aspect of learning and developing ourselves and looking for villages that want to bring us in and love us and show us and influence us to be better is so important. And I think the work that you're doing, and I could tell from the conversation, the books that you've written, and the work you continue to do is going to be a testament to that, where you're coming in with love, you're coming in with an understanding that it's a journey. Right. So where you are today is not where you're going to be tomorrow, most likely. Right. We make progress. And from there, the progression begins. And so, I just love to have conversations like this, real conversations where people can learn, where they can experience, where they can get some insight, where they can say things are possible. And so what I would love from you, if you would like to give us some final words, of course, or if you just want to get straight into how people can find you, reach out to you and begin working with you.
Yeah, so I'm pretty easily accessible. My website is brownsleadership.com. I can be emailed at email@brownsleadership.com. I do speaking events, and then people can find me there, if they want access to the books or any information. They can also find me on X at MTBrown98. So, that's where they can find me. And I just want to thank you, Michael, for the work you're doing. And I imagine at some point, right, you had a decision. Do I take this risk and start this podcast? And because you decided to do that, right, you were able to have these type conversations, and we're able to partner in these type conversations. So keep up the good work of what you're doing. And as far as to the audience and those that might be listening now or may even hear this conversation days or years down the road, be reminded to find your purpose, get passionate about it, and don't stop until you make the impact that you're called to make. Thanks again for having me.
Of course. And this podcast is something that I created It's almost it wasn't a mistake, but it was from a failure where I had a motivational video series and I did like 26 episodes and then I stopped. And then I was like, what do I do? Do I do another motivational video series? And I was like, I want to create something that's going to be there if I'm not there. Because one day I'm going to be dead and gone. I already know that. And so I wanted to create a podcast where I'm not only talking to people by myself, right? I don't want to be an echo chamber. I want to bring other minds like yourself, Michael, where people can get different insight. They can get a different feel. I believe there's tonality in voice and people can get something from someone that they couldn't get from someone else. My coach, in elementary school, one of the sweetest guys in the world, right? I needed him, right? Even though he might have felt like I wasn't part of the team. And I remember, just like a quick tidbit, is during 5th grade is when you can go into sports at the school I was at. So I was able to join the basketball team, but we had family issues and stuff like that. So I couldn't get the health insurance for my father at the time. So I couldn't get a physical to be on the sports team. And so I couldn't even bring myself to tell the coach, what was the issue. It was because of family issues. Like I couldn't even get a physical. And then he was like, he was always asking me when he saw me because his son also went to the school. And he was like, all right, he's like, hey, are you coming to practice? Like what's happening? I was like, we'll see what happens. I never told him. But then the next year I had the insurance card. I made sure I talked to my dad. I was like, just give me the insurance card, right? So I had it in my hand. And I remember I was going out for tryouts and everything again. And the coach even said, like, are you going to play this year? I was like, yes, I'm going to play this year with confidence because I had the card in my hand and I knew I can get the physical. And so, I begged my mom. I was like, all right, let's go. Let's get my physical. Let's get everything I need. And I played. Right? I played in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And it was something that I wouldn't have done if I didn't have that failure. Yeah. Right. So it's the failures sometimes in life that I want to present to people. Right. I'm not a perfect individual. I don't want to be that perfect individual. Right. I want people to see the imperfections. And then I want them to see the possibilities after. Because people can look at their life for what it is today. And they can say, well, this is all it is. This is what I am. This is my corner. This is my block. This is my crew, whatever it be. But all these young men, if they have positive influences, as you said early on, game changers. Yes. Right? The teacher that cared. It doesn't matter if there's a teacher who didn't care when you were in 4th grade. Right? Find the teachers that care. Yes. There's always going to be teachers. I was surrounded by good teachers. In my whole teaching career, I probably met 2-3 teachers that were like, they needed to retire. Right? But that is only a shadow to the hundreds, if not thousands of teachers that were in the profession that care. Yeah. Right. The counselors that care, the therapists that care, right. The coaches that care, right. All these people are someone that you should be, trying to say, hey, let me learn from you. Right. Get the books, right. Learn from them, right. Go into their village, speak to the elders, right. Speak to the individuals, right. The warriors, learn what's possible. And I think from there we can truly start to make some change on that. And, I'm definitely going to wrap up the podcast now. But did you want to say anything? Because sometimes I talk at the end and people want to say something. No, I would just, put a cap on that. The whole idea that if we'll persevere, good things can happen. And the only way sometimes we can be seen by others is we put ourselves in a position to be seen. And no, well said. The whole point of, the adversity, the failures, the L's, some people call them losses. Well, they may be a loss, but they can also be a lesson. And we can learn from it, grow from it, and move forward. It goes a long way. So enjoyed the time here today. Perfect. Yes, sir. Of course, all the links are in the description box below. So everyone check out Michael T. Brown. And I'm sure he'll love to have a conversation with you if you're, whether a young person or a family member looking to enhance yourself, looking to enhance your situation. If you're looking for a speaker at an event or a school, again, a great asset to have in your back pocket. He's going to be able to inspire and light the way for so many lost souls. So thank you so much, Michael, for coming on today. Thanks again for having me. Take care.